Just give us the thumbs up when you're good to go, please.
Okay, good evening, members. Unfortunately, because of a technical glitch, we can't live stream this evening, so the meeting will be recorded and uploaded at a later date. Cabinet members, we'll go on from introducing yourself, and I will start from Councillor Warren Gibson.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Warren Gibson, Deputy Leader of the Council and Cabinet Member for Local Government Reorganisation and Devolution.
Councillor Tim Copsey, Cabinet Member for Strategic Planning.
Good evening all. Councillor Rob Lillis, Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Housing.
Evening all. Councillor Tom Gibson, Cabinet Member for Special Projects and Assets.
Good evening. Councillor Steve Mountford, Cabinet Member for Resources.
Good evening, Chairman. Councillor Michael Fuller, Cabinet Member for Environment.
Thank you, members. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Sonia, please.
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillors Palmer and Savage.
Thank you, Sonia. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Members, are there any declarations of interest? No, no declarations of interest. Agenda item 3, minutes of the previous meetings. Members, is it approved that I sign the minutes as approved reflection of last meeting? Thank you very much. I will sign the minutes if I can find it. Thank you, members. Agenda item 5, update on Castle Point local plan. Councillor Gibson, can you please give the Cabinet a verbal update on Castle Point plan? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I will give an update. Although Councillor Tim Copsey is his portfolio, but I think it's important as Chairman of the Plan Board that I give a further update. So, members, on the 10th of April, the Leader, myself and Cabinet Member for Strategic Planning, Councillor Tim Copsey, issued a statement about our progress on the Castle Point plan and published the results of the issues and options public consultation. The statement is on our website, but because of its importance, I wanted to reiterate it today. Since this administration resolved to withdraw the previous, deeply unpopular, unadopted local plan on the 15th of June 2022, we have worked consistently on the Castle Point plan. In December 2023, the then government amended the National Planning Policy Framework. Those changes aligned still further with the approach the Council was taking, and on that basis, we were encouraged to continue at pace towards submission. We were due to approve the Regulation 18 Issues and Options Report in June 2024. But as a result of the snap general election, the timetable clashed with the pre-election period, and so the decision had to be delayed until July. Despite this delay, we remained on track to submit the Castle Point plan in accordance with our LDS. However, at the end of July 2024, the new government published a new draft MPPF. We as a council, we responded to the consultation on the new draft, and we set out strongly the difficulties of accommodating the new target for housing that was double that from the previous standard methodology, and the new approach the MPPF was to introduce to the Greenbelt. We were clear in our response to the government on the negative impact that these fundamental changes, if made in the new MPPM, would have on this borough. In addition, the council was concerned that the transition period in the draft MPPF to submit plans for examination under the 2023 MPPF would put councils, such as Castle Point, at a very significant disadvantage, given that we were advanced in producing the Regulation 19 plan to meet that ambitious timetable. We recommended that the government change the transition period until the end of June 2025. So we were extremely disappointed, but not surprised, that the 2024 MPPF, when published in December, amongst other things, reset the standard methodology for calculating the government's requirement for housing. This was double the target of new homes the government wants to see built in our borough. They also introduced changes to how the Greenbelt should be considered in plan making. Both of these issues have presented additional challenges to the preparation of the Castle Point plan. The extra work has meant that our timetable has had to be revised. We would rather not be in this position, but we need to ensure that when we submit our plan, which has been prepared for engaging with the community, that we do so with the best chance of being found sound, but also delivering the right plan for the borough. Additional resource has been brought in to assist, and we remain in communication with the government about our progress. We have undertaken full and proper engagement from the outset with the local community, with businesses, our partners and stakeholders in order to rebuild their trust in plan making in the borough and to ensure that we fully understood the aspirations of the community to shape the issues the Castle Point plan needed to address. The results of the issues and options public consultation are set out in the issues and options consultations report, which is on the website. The report makes clear that there is overwhelming public support for restricting development to the urban area. When we withdrew the previous plan in 2022, we were clear on the priorities for the new Castle Point plan. It was to be based on a genuinely assessed local housing need. It would prioritise brownfield and urban sites, and it would protect the Greenbelt. The council made the commitment to work with the local community to ensure their views were heard and that the Castle Point plan would be adopted and implemented. We have not wavered from those objectives, and work on a Castle Point plan continues, and we will continue to those objectives. Thank you, Chairman. Any questions, I'm happy to take them, but as it's only an update, I'm not expecting any.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson, for a comprehensive update. Members, are there any questions? No questions? Okay. Members, thanks. We'll move on to the next item. Agenda item 6, plan for the neighbourhoods. We have a report providing details of the changes government has made to the long-term plan for the town fund on Canvey. Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Leader. So this is just a report for noting, just to advise Cabinet of the recent changes the government has made to what was called the Long-Term Plan for Towns Fund, now called the Plans for Neighbourhoods Fund. The fund was originally launched by the government in October 2023 to provide £20 million worth of funding over 10 years to support local regeneration projects. In the March 2024 budget, the government announced that Canvey Island was to receive £20 million. Although the council is the accountable body for the fund, the investment plans for the fund were to be determined by an independent town board. Members approved the town board and the terms of reference for that board in June 2024, which were submitted to the government for approval. The expectation was that the government would have approved the terms of reference, which would have allowed for the project to proceed. However, the project was delayed nationally due to the general election and subsequent review by the new government. It was not until the 4th of March this year that the project was relaunched as the Plan for Neighbourhoods, and new guidance issued on the 12th of March 2025. As with the long-term plan for towns, the Plan for Neighbourhoods Fund can be used on a wide range of projects within the Canvey Island community. The government has identified 8 categories of interventions that the money can be used for, which have been pre-approved by the Treasury. In other words, this means that if projects align with these interventions, the board will not have to provide a business case. The initial 3 intervention categories provided in the plan in its previous form were safety and security, regeneration, high streets and heritage, and transport. These first 3 were the interventions used for the long-term plan for towns, and the government, in addition, has now added the following: housing, work, productivity and skills, cohesion, health and well-being, and education and opportunity. What is clear is that the board must engage with the local community in developing its investment plan and demonstrate that the proposals have the support of the local community and address the needs and issues identified by the local community. As the accountable body, the council will need to provide support and oversight to the board on how the money is used and that the guidelines are followed. The next stage will be to reconvene the town board approved in June 2024, and this will include a facilitated workshop. The previous chairman has advised that they no longer wish to continue in the role, and a new chair is to be appointed. The investment plan, which will set out how the fund will be scheduled for the initial first 5 years, will need to be submitted before the end of the year, and once approved, the funding will start in 2026-27. The fund is split between capital projects making up 75% and revenue 25%. The council is entitled to draw down 4% of the funding to cover its accountable body costs. This report is for noting, and further reports will be made to Cabinet for either decision or to note progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gibson. I'm pleased to know that the government has actually brought this back, because I think it means such a big thing for the residents of Canvey Island. £20 million over 10 years is quite an awful lot of money. And I think, as you're right, the different options has been changed. Perhaps, Ian, you could actually enlighten us about how the town team is going to be set up, how the system works, because the most important thing we need to get across is that this has got to be residents' ideas. So perhaps you could just enlighten the committee. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. The golden thread that runs through this is that the community identifies what needs to be done in Canvey Island. Now, we have, to a very large extent, been doing that already. The work we've been doing, for example, the engagement on the Castle Point plan, has enabled the community to tell us what the issues are and the critical issues are within Canvey Island, and that's really important. The role of the town board is to take that information and to craft out an investment plan based on those priorities identified by the local community, and then consult with the local community. Are these the things that you want us to tackle? Is this the best use of the money? Open questions, not closed questions. It's really important, and the emphasis of the officials that I've met with has been that they are looking to ensure that in what we submit in the investment plan has that link back to the local community. This is not an opportunity for us as a local authority to dictate to the board what we feel that money should be invested in, even though we will be one of the key delivery vehicles for that money. So the money will come back to us for us to deliver it, or to other partners like the NHS, Essex County Council and others. Our job is to facilitate those discussions. But it's the board who make the final decisions, and as long as they can show that these are the projects that the local community wants to see, then all should be good, and we should have that investment plan signed off, and then we can just crack on with it.
Thank you, Ian. And I'm sure there'll be lots of projects, and I'm sure dredging the Canvey Lake and a business case for a third borough will be one of the top things what come through. So I look forward to that. Any questions from members of the Cabinet? No questions. Okay, members, is that noted? Thank you very much. Okay, so moving on to agenda item 7, Building Safety Regulator Audit Action Plan. Next is a report with an update on the inspection of the Council's building control function by the Building Safety Regulator and the progress on the items identified in the action plan. Councillor Gopsey, please introduce your item.
Thank you, Chair. You will remember that earlier this year I brought an important report before Cabinet to adopt a building control enforcement policy and provide an update on our response to the Building Safety Regulator's recent inspection of our building control service. To provide a brief background to this, building safety has never been more in the spotlight, particularly following the introduction of the Building Safety Act. This Act introduces a stronger regulatory framework to ensure building control bodies are operating to the highest standards in safeguarding the health, safety and welfare of people in and around buildings. In November 2024, we were notified that our building control function would be inspected by the Building Safety Regulator. This was part of a national audit programme that will see all building control bodies inspected over time. Following the inspection, the regulator issued a letter of contravention setting out areas where improvements were needed. While the findings were at the lower end of the enforcement scale, it was crucial that we acted swiftly to ensure full compliance and maintain our high standards. At the February Cabinet meeting, I presented a copy of the action plan addressing the items raised by the regulator, and I said that I would provide an update on the progress ahead of the deadline to respond, which is 25th of April. I'm pleased to say that all items identified on the action plan in response to the regulator's findings have now been actioned, and we are ready to submit our response by the deadline. Following submission of our response, the regulator will undertake a further assessment of the council to ensure compliance. Once the outcome of the regulator's reassessment is known, this will be shared with members. This demonstrates the pace and commitment of our officers in responding to the inspection findings, and I would like to thank all officers involved, particularly Ian Grimwade, the council's building control manager, for all their hard work in reaching this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. That is good news. Members, are there any comments? Cabinet members? No? Okay, members, is that item noted? Thank you very much. Item agenda 8, empty homes policy. We have before us a report seeking the approval of a new empty homes policy. Councillor Lillis, could you please introduce your item?
Thank you, Leader. Cabinet, this report is to bring forward a new policy which sets out the Council's approach to securing compliance with the law in relation to properties within the Borough which are determined as empty homes within the policy. And the policy is set out in Appendix 1. The purpose of the policy is to set out the Council's approach to identifying empty properties within the Borough which fall within the definition of empty homes, in respect of which the Council has statutory duties and powers, and to set out how these statutory powers will be used. The Council is committed to reducing the number of empty homes in the Borough and to return them to productive residential use, so that they might increase the supply of housing to help meet the varying needs of all residents. For the purposes of this policy, other than for council tax premiums, an empty home is defined as a residential property that has been unoccupied for at least 6 months and which is unoccupied on a regular basis, whether furnished or not. A home is typically classified as a long-term empty home after being unoccupied for over 2 years, because this duration provides a clear distinction between properties that are vacant due to temporary circumstances and those that are persistently unused. Second homes are not included within the scope of this policy, except in relation to council tax premiums. The key aims of the policy are A, to return all empty homes into productive residential use in the most appropriate way in the shortest possible timescale. B, to actively engage with all long-term empty property owners to understand why the properties are empty, offer help and assistance, including signposting as necessary, using partnership and community working and/or by taking enforcement action. And C, to prevent properties from becoming and staying long-term empty properties. If I may give some wider context, within Castle Point Borough, according to 2021 data from the Office for National Statistics, most of the residential property is owner-occupied at 82% of the total housing stock. This is the second highest council for owner occupation in the country. This leaves social housing, including council housing, at 11%, the private rented sector at around 5%, and empty second homes and other unspecified properties at 2%. Unfortunately, this high owner occupation rate means that there are limited places that the council can place people from the housing register because there is such a small proportion of housing stock available for rental. As the Cabinet Member for Health, Wellbeing and Housing, this is something that I am acutely aware of. It is further compounded by the fact that most people on the housing register are on universal credit or benefits that are means tested. These benefits usually mean that those people will be on housing benefit, so have limited income to pay for the rent. Because there are relatively few private rented properties available in the borough, the rents being charged for those properties that are available are considerably higher than the local housing allowance rents, which are used for housing benefit calculations. This means that top-ups and guarantors are often required for each new let. So, there is a very high need for any affordable housing. The council has a duty to find accommodation for those on the housing register, and the high cost of temporary and discharge of final duty to residents places a very significant financial burden upon the council. At the end of July 2024, there were 462 empty homes within the borough. Against this backdrop and the wider context, the implementation of this policy presents an opportunity to bring at least some of these properties back into productive residential use. The legal duties and powers which the council has in relation to empty homes under building control, council tax, environmental health, housing and planning and regeneration are set out before you in section 6 of the report. Properties defined as empty homes in accordance with this policy may also fall within the definition of empty homes or second homes set out in the council's policy relating to council tax premiums payable on empty and second homes, which was adopted by a decision of full council on 26 March 2025. Consequently, an owner of an empty home identified pursuant to this policy may be liable for payment of additional council tax, the empty and second homes premium. The policy sets out at paragraph 8 where exceptions to the payment of the empty and second homes premium may be granted, including the use of discretionary powers the council has to extend exceptions should there be circumstances outside of the property owner's control. These exceptions, when applied, will provide relief to property owners in respect of the empty and second homes premium. To make it easier for residents to find out about empty homes and report them to the council, in addition to the usual means of contacting the council, information will be added to the council's website, including a report form for residents to complete and submit. The environmental health team will produce information sheets detailing common problems affecting empty homes, and these, together with relevant application forms and signposts to guidance from other organisations, will be made available on the council's website. Of the two options before you this evening, the preferred option is option 2. The implications of the council not choosing to adopt the policy are set out in sections 10 to 16 of the report. Cabinet, I'm aware that when the council's policy relating to council tax premiums payable on empty and second homes was presented to full council earlier this year, councillors expressed some genuine concerns in relation to the probate process and the length of time that this can take. In particular, I would like to thank Councillor John Knott, Councillor Barry Palmer and Councillor Warren Gibson for the questions that they raised that evening. I have worked closely with officers to ensure that the wording of the policy reflects the levels of empathy that I and the aforementioned would expect this council to show to our residents when they might need us the most. Finally, I take this opportunity to thank all of those that have worked on this policy over the past year or so: Councillor Sharon Ainsley, Councillor Alan Edwards, Councillor Michael Fuller and Councillor Steve Mountford, and Joanna Tall, Senior Environmental Health Officer, who sits to my left, Janet Parker East, Assistant Director of Environmental Health, Licensing and Community, who sits to my right, and Angela Hutchins, our Chief Executive. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. This is a very important subject, and I must admit, I was quite surprised when I read it. Nationally, there's 1.5 million empty properties across the country, nearly as many as the government wants to build. And I think it's so important that these should be brought back so that, you know, we can use them for our tenants who need properties to rent. And I'm really pleased that you're talking about being very discretionary about probate, but also can I also ask, I've had one or two landlords on to me about the possibility where a tenant has left their property in such a state it's taken them more than 6 months to put it back into good order. So as long as we take that in account, that and I'm sure we will, and I'm sure our officers will be. So members, are there any other questions from members? No questions from members? Okay. So, members, I will move the recommendation to approve and adopt the policy set out in Apex 1. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Gibson. Moving on then, is that agreed, members? Thank you. Agenda item 9, a request for a discretionary disabled facility grant. Next, we have a report providing details of a request for a discretionary disabled facility grant for a child living within the borough. Councillor Lillis, please introduce this item.
Thank you, Leader. Cabinet, you will now be familiar with such requests for discretionary disabled facilities grants. I believe this is the third such request that I have had the pleasure of presenting to Cabinet since I was appointed to this role. That said, I think it is important in the interests of transparency that each request before us is considered on its own merits. The Council has received a Disabled Facilities Grant DFG recommendation for the Child of Borough Residents, Child C. This was provided by an occupational therapist who has recommended works which are required to enable Child C to live safely and as independently as possible in their own home. As the cost of these works is forecast to exceed the mandatory limit of £30,000, an additional discretionary grant is being requested to top up the mandatory grant. By way of some background, Environmental Health Services received an occupational therapist, OT, referral on behalf of Child C, after it had been identified that they were experiencing the following difficulties: accessing bathroom facilities. The OT recommended that the following works are considered necessary and appropriate: to extend the current bathroom into the rear elevation of the property and to install a standard bath and thermostatically controlled overbath shower. At the request of parents of Child C, the case was forwarded to the Council's nominated delivery partner, Epping Forest District Council, to compile the necessary documentation required as part of the grant application process. The home of Child C was surveyed, technical drawings completed, and suitable contractors engaged to obtain quotes for the works. The cheapest acceptable of the 3 quotes for completion of the relevant works, including all fees, was £46,857.26. Subject to eligibility criteria being met, the Council is legally required to approve properly made applications for DFG up to £30,000. The Castle Point Disabled Facilities Grants policy allows for a discretionary top-up of up to £30,000 in addition to the mandatory award of £30,000, subject to the circumstances meeting the relevant criteria described in the policy, which includes seeking alternative sources of funding where practicable to do so. The total cost of the DFG works amount to £46,857.26. After the mandatory £30,000 grant has been awarded, this will leave £16,857.26. However, with works of this type and extent, the need to provide contingency for unforeseen works is industry standard, so it is recommended that authorisation of up to £25,000 is approved to ensure that any reasonable unforeseen works can be covered within the grant. The works applied for are considered necessary and appropriate to meet the needs of Child C and are reasonable and practicable considering the age and condition of the building. Of the 3 options before you this evening, option 1 is recommended due to the necessity for the works to be completed, the demonstrable benefits provided to Child C, a disabled person, and the need to ensure that the works are undertaken in a timely manner with minimum risk of delay or disruption for Child C and their parents. In accordance with paragraph 2.6 of the policy, a capped charge of £10,000 would automatically be placed on the property for the mandatory DFG works because they are valued at more than £5,000. This amount would be recovered only if the property is sold within 10 years. The policy also states that discretionary grants will be recovered in full following the sale of the property. An additional charge to the value of the final sum awarded would therefore also be placed on the property for the total amount of discretionary funds awarded. This charge would not have an expiry term. I would like to thank Jeanette Parker East, the Assistant Director Environmental Health, Licensing and Community, Simon Llewellyn, the Environmental Health Operational Manager, and Laura Hemsworth, who joins us this evening, the Senior Environmental Health Officer, for their good work on this grant application and others that have come before us. Finally, I take this opportunity on behalf of all those here present to wish Child C and his or her parents all the very best for the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Ellis. And I'm pleased to see these come. And I say this every time because I think, you know, as a local authority, I mean, whatever we can do to help a disabled person live more independently in their own home has got to be a good thing. And I thank everybody for doing all what they've done to try and help these residents of Castle Point. Members, are there any questions that need to be asked? Members, I'll move two recommendations set out in paragraph 3.1 of the report. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Gibson,
Yeah, I'll second
thank
that.
you very much. Is that agreed, members? Agreed. Thank you very much. Okay, moving on, agenda item 10, report from the Standards Committee and Social Media Policy for Councillors. The next item is a report from the Standards Committee seeking approval of the social media policy for councillors. Councillor Edwards, please introduce this item.
Sorry, Chairman, if I may, I'm happy to wait for Councillor Edwards to do the report, or I can raise a slight concern I've got now. Well, I'll be hoping if we can defer this, and if you like, I'll tell you the reasons why.
Councillor Gibson, yes, if you want to actually raise your...
Thank you, Chairman. Absolutely support the policy and thank the Standards Committee, the working group, what they've done on it, the monitoring officer. However, I do have a concern, and I'll put my hands up. It is in the report. I've read the policy, but I didn't actually note the options. I've got serious concerns about option 1, which says do nothing. This option is not recommended, as a number of complaints relating to potential breaches of the Councillor Code of Conduct have involved social media interaction. Now, granted, it says potential breaches. I understand that. However, what concerns me is members of the public and other people are reading these reports and they pick them up. To me, that reads like there is, if you like, there maybe have been some complaints that have been upheld against current sitting members. And the reason that doesn't sit well with me is because, I mean, and I'm speaking now not as Deputy Leader of the Council, but as the Group Leader of the People's Independent Party. You've got myself and 23 other councillors who haven't been around long. We started in 2021. None of us are experienced councillors, and I'm proud of the fact that there is not one complaint that's been upheld on the website against any of the current sitting councillors. There are complaints on there, but there are none of the current sitting councillors. So I would like that option, either the wording be changed, I know it would just say do nothing, or I think it's important that we reiterate that in there, because to me that does read like there's been a load of complaints come in, isn't quite clear that none of them have been upheld. It's not quite clear that, and obviously I'm not going to name anybody, but it's not quite clear that the complaints tend to come from a very, very small minority of the community. So if you want, I mean, we're happy to go ahead with the report, or I would like it to be deferred and that option removed or changed. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Councillor Gibson. I'll ask the Chief Executive for some guidance on this one.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Gibson, the option there is in terms of the recommendation is the recommendation which is being asked to be moved. You can the comments that you've made can be noted in the minutes, and that commentary reflected in the minutes to change the because it's not a recommendation. To change the wording in the report now probably wouldn't achieve the outcome that you're looking for and isn't covered by the Constitution. My suggestion is, because the recommendation is to adopt the option, you begin to adopt the redraft social media policy, that you can agree that option but note that the option which you rejected are for the reasons that you've articulated, and that can be recorded.
Representative Gibson?
Yes, thank you, Angela. I mean, as long as that is minuted and the reasons why, then yeah, okay, I'm happy for it to go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Edwards, would you like to read your report?
Thank you, Leader. I will keep this brief. As Councillor Gibson has said, the Standards Committee has a brief to not only maintain the standards of the Council, but to continually try and drive up the standards of behaviour that we have. And we therefore keep an eye on the detail of the complaints that come in. And as has been noted, the majority of complaints that come in, and it's a very small number in comparison to most councils in the country, are related to interactions on social media, none of which have been found to have fault for any of the current members of the council. However, being aware that this is an area that causes members of the public concern, we set up a working group to review the social media policy to make sure that we've got absolutely clear guidelines for us to all obey and be mindful of. And the working group had agreed the policy that you've got before you in hand in glove with the monitoring officer and with best practice that we assessed from around the country. So we've considered this policy at the meeting on the 3rd of April. We noted that the perception of the public is a key consideration, which is why we want to bring this policy forward. Given that the committee's approved this, it's been reviewed, I'd like to commend this to the Cabinet for adoption.
Thank you, Councillor Edwards. Members, are there any further questions? Councillor Tom Gibson?
Thank you, Leader. Just for a bit of clarity on the very last point of the social media policy. So it says monitoring and review of the policy. It says this policy is to be reviewed every year by the monitoring officer. The chief executive might be best placed to answer this question, but is that to say that any changes will have to go back to the scrutiny committee or cabinet or something like that? So if it's reviewed and the monitoring officer thinks it needs to be changed at all, will there be member oversight to that process? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Yes, of course. The matter will be brought by the monitoring officer back to Standards Committee for review.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, I will move the recommendation to approve the social media policy for council set out in Apex. In the Apex, do I have a seconder? Councillor Gibson, thank you very much. Members, is that agreed? Agreed, thank you very much. Agenda item 11, matters referred from the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Members, there are none. That concludes the formal business for this evening. Meeting closed at 7:42. Thank you very much, members. Good evening.